Mike Morrison, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's nice to finally meet you. Could you
Yes,
introduce yourself and your work?
sure. So, quick life story. I'm Mike Morrison. I was a web developer, like a full stack software developer. Went to get a PhD in work psychology, and then I had like a health scare, and I was like, okay, I need to speed like all of science up. And I decided that maybe I knew these tech skills and these design skills to save scientists clicks and to design their interfaces better. So maybe I'd focus on that. So I kind of shifted away from work psychology and started trying to improve the interfaces of science. And I'm most known for creating this scientific poster layout that went viral a few years ago and affected like 250,000 poster designs or something like that in science, and still going today. So my day job is that I work at Curvena, which is a wonderful software company in science who's working on redesigning scientific publishing. And then my night job is working on these overall design projects in science, doing research studies on how we can improve the design of science's interfaces. So that's my thing, is like saving scientists clicks, helping them understand a poster faster, little tiny efficiency wins in the knowledge transmission of science.
How did you spot that science was suffering from bad UX? What gave you this impression?
When I was in the tech industry, I assumed that science had the best of everything. So I thought that moving from tech to science would feel like stepping into the future, but instead it kind of felt like stepping into the past. I felt like the second I got to science, I was like, everything is badly designed. Everything is so old. Everything looks like it was, built 20 years ago. They don't know anything about these UX best practices, but I didn't care. And I think like a lot of scientists, like, you have this career trajectory. So you can have a good career in science without fixing anything. We're just using the current system the way it is. And so there's not a lot of incentive to try to improve it. You have to be kind of like a true believer. And so that was the combination for me, is I had the tech skills to be able to notice all of these like outdated systems and things and know the best practices. But I also had that motivation from the health scare to be like, okay, I'm actually going to try to do something about it. But yeah, if you come from the tech industry or you just have any modern standards of design at all, and you look at science, like it'll be obvious to you really quickly that it has the worst of everything.
This was my impression as well. I'm a front-end developer, as we spoke, and I'm used to looking at modern interfaces with new technologies. Everything is colorful and user-friendly. And I remember the first time I encountered a research paper, I was looking at some topic or some rabbit hole, I don't know, and I decided, okay, let me see what these science papers are like. And when I entered the website, everything was like a time machine. I was like
Yeah,
back in
yeah,
the
yeah.
90s. So I remember when I first got a computer at a young age, these were the websites and this is how the software looked. And now I just felt like I was a child back again.
It's so damning. That's even worse than the way I said it. Yeah, you feel like you're time traveling to when you were a child and had these old interfaces. And like as a designer, usually that's it's funny. Like, okay, I can fix this, but like that's so consequential. Like, I mean, like imagine now like going into the lab of the researchers trying to cure the disease that's going to kill you, right? And
Yeah.
they're using all of these old interfaces and trying to understand these like horribly written things. And like it's the pace of science itself is so much slower than it should be. So that's the depressing part, is like the implications of all of that outdated
Yeah,
crap.
when people think about accelerating science or making it better and faster, they think about more money, better equipment, better design studies, but no one thinks about the way people and regular people and scientists how they interact with it.
I can speak my language. I think probably we both have this tech background, so I see the world exactly similarly. Where
Yeah,
like I even see like like I'll see these big philanthropists and things. Like I think like some of the Google founders who are like, okay, I have this genetic risk of this disease. I don't want to die from it, so I'm going to pour billions of dollars into this disease. And like, great, but also like if you were to pour that same money into just improving the system, you'd probably get the cures too. And you'd get in like, the other problem is that some diseases are complex. So if you want to cure just, like long COVID or something, you need to accelerate like neuroinflammation, immunology, virology, like all these different fields, right? And the way to do that, like the simplest way I can think of is like it's kind of UX, it's like if it takes a scientist 15 clicks to access a paper, if you can shorten that to 14 clicks and save every scientist 1 click per paper across every paper they read, you're speeding up the cures for every single disease by like, a minute a year or something. And so it's straightforward to me, but not the
Yeah,
discounting funding that goes to science.
this investment that you're speaking about, like philanthropists, and if they invest to better the system, the impact will be like very wide. It will affect the whole industry as a whole, and it will
Yeah,
set the standard for across the board.
I completely agree. Yeah. And like the trouble I've seen is that I think I've seen people try to do this from the tech industry, especially. And they think like, I think like you or I would think is sort of like, I think when I came to scientific publishing, I was like, oh, easy. You're just publishing text files. We've been doing that for 30 years, like I'll build a better publishing system in a weekend. And that's true. You can build a better scientific publishing system in a weekend, but no one will use it because you have all of these perverse incentives and all of these human motivations to deal with to publish the old way. And so like, that's the really big problem is that it's not purely, even the best technology solution in the world can't solve it by itself. You have to solve the human problem too. And that's where I think a lot of that tech thinking that I have to like is missing.
But why do you think
Really.
that is? That they don't care about UX, or they don't have the money? That's the status quo, or they need to be educated? What do you think?
I think they blame themselves when they don't understand something. Like, I don't know if you felt this. You talked about that story where you like first dove in and tried to read a scientific article, right? I mean, there's a lot of answers to this question, but like, I think you had that foresight or that understanding to be like, this is badly designed, right? Like I know what good design is. This is terribly designed. That's why I can't understand it, right? Whereas I think a lot of, especially new PhD students and things, they're like, this is hard to understand. I'm so stupid. Like I'm not good enough to be here. Like I need to learn more about this topic. That imposter syndrome is so baked into you in science that like, I think a lot of scientists blame themselves when they should be blaming the design. Um, and we get that message too in a PhD program. You're like, like read more thoroughly, or whatever. It's like maybe the method section should just be better designed and I don't have to read it more thoroughly. It should just come to me. And there's probably truth to both those. I think that's one factor. I mean, there's a lot of obviously reasons, but and they don't understand this UX stuff. They don't, for some reason. It's like I think you said also that before the call, you said that when you saw a scientific interface and it was very complex and tiny and badly designed, you were like, this feels like science. That's what I expected, is this like
Yes.
complexity and like this difficulty, right? And so when you depart from that feeling of complexity and difficulty, scientists resent it. It doesn't feel like science anymore, right? And so
Yeah.
like it's this weird paradox, and I just posted research on this where like if you design something well, people understand it better. If you design it badly, people like trust it more. They like think it's more scientific feeling. And so there's that going on too.
Do you think they have it in themselves like, okay, we need to have it complex in order for our work to feel more important? And when we communicate it in an accessible manner, it feels like we're dumbing down our work.
100%. And I think that that's not the scientist's fault. I think that's the incentive's fault. So like, I think a lot of scientists are capable of communicating really brilliantly and really creatively. Like if you, my favorite example of this is like my friend, hi Carl, who's a biophysicist, and he was drinking a lot one night, and I asked him how to create a werewolf, right? And like you're a biophysicist, how would I make a werewolf? And he took me seriously, and he gave me this beautiful explanation of how to he's like, well, like the muscles would be the hard part. You could accelerate the bone growth, and like it was. I wish I'd recorded it, but it was like it was simultaneously like incredibly intelligent and so engaging or whatever, and like I think every scientist is capable of that, but the system doesn't reward them. If you were to, I mean, like, I used to have this hobby of collecting the one sentence in every scientific paper where the author let their personality out, like just like a little
Hmm.
bit, just like a little
Yeah.
tiny bit or whatever. And it was the best. It's always the best sentence in the paper. It always brings it home. And it's always like, I couldn't figure out how to say this in a complex, pompous way. So I said it like a human being for just half a sentence. I hope that's okay. And like, I think it's really sad to me that all of these, like, I think every scientist wants to do that a little bit, but you need that air of formality and importance to get the publication. I don't know. There's a lot there. And like, I think there's one more example on this was where I was watching this PhD student defend his dissertation, and he wanted feedback on his slides. And I was like, well, this slide's a little confusing. And he said, exactly. I was like, what are you talking about? And he goes, well, if they don't understand it, they'll just pass me. And I think there's so much truth in that statement, right? That if you overwhelm people, they like blame themselves. They're like, yeah, okay, good, or whatever, right? It takes like a really high level scientist to be like, this doesn't make any sense or whatever. So I don't know. There's a lot there. I mean, it's psychology, right? There's a million factors here driving this broken system.
I also feel the medium sort of restricts that. It doesn't allow the scientists to let their personality shine. It's very because
You have,
when they do
yeah,
that, it's more engaging.
100%. And that helps people learn. If we let scientists let their personality out more, like these are smart, funny, creative people. Like if that was more in the articles, I think the reader experience, you'd learn more, you'd have more science engagement. And I don't think you'd sacrifice precision. But exactly what you just said about the medium too, like if you limit people to just tiny text in these columns and, tiny figures that are like really regulated or whatever, you're not really going to let that creativity flourish. And you have the peer review where you're just trying to get through, right? And so it doesn't really encourage you to be like, I don't know, make a cool video or like an animated GIF to explain your research or like that's. Punished. So yeah, they're lacking the tools too. But that's
Yeah.
starting to
While I was preparing for this podcast, it got me thinking. Let me see what you think about this. That if scientists or researchers could have like their own, I don't know, personal brand or online presence, they don't have to be like full-time vloggers or something, but have some kind of presence online where people can get to know them and let their personality shine, like we discussed. And when they publish something or when they have something to share with the world, they already have an audience which are interested in that. What do you think about that?
that's the future I want to see, right? Like if you've worked, I mean, you work with scientists too. Like there's such wonderful, interesting, amazing people on Zoom calls. And then when they go to,
Yeah,
when you read the paper, it's all dry and or whatever. But like,
yeah,
I really want, like, there's such a gap between how amazing the people are themselves and what is allowed to come through in these shitty, tiny publications, right? That I'd love to see exactly that world where like there's no gap there, where each scientist, like they have their own kind of flair that they put on things and they're allowed to do that. And they're allowed to sort of let that like flow freely and have a place for that for themselves and get famous for it. I mean, like there are so many people I know that just like they deserve a lot more recognition than they're getting, and because they're just these amazing people, like publicly. And I think we could have that if we had a better publishing system and we let scientists do it for sure.
I guess the public, when they think of a scientist, they think of someone with a lab coat and who doesn't leave the laboratory. And that's sort of this divide between the public perception and how scientists actually are. Like you said, they're very intelligent people and they're interesting to talk to. But I guess this gap is widened by what you're trying to solve. This divide between the way science is communicated, that people cannot get to know the inner working of science and how it's not just the papers and how you read them or how you present your research. It's about how science is perceived and communicated.
I think 100%, right? Like the same gap, right, between who a scientist is and what they're allowed to sort of present themselves as is also the gap between how the public views science and how they should, right? It's the same gap. Yeah, that's well said. Like I think, yeah, I think we could really the state of public perception of science could improve so much if we were to close that gap, which is like probably the opposite of the assumption, right? It's like, oh, for public to trust science, we need to be like more self-important and more like formal or whatever. But really, like the opposite's probably true. Like if like scientists can be very relatable. Like I think the only public example we have of scientists are like the Big Bang Theory, right? Or these like obscure characters in movies and things like that. Which is like scientists are like all of us, like they're your friends, they're your family members, they're the people you marry, they're wonderful people that yeah, I hope the world gets to know them more through better publishing. One of the things I'm trying to do with that actually is trying to get more of these scientific talks recorded and like posted to YouTube because like that's a little bit where you get to see the scientists be themselves, like a little bit, depending on the conference and how well they set it up, right? But like, some of that's where you can see the scientist personality come through. They're pre-translating it. So if we can put more people like that on YouTube and places like that, I think it might start to help.
Yeah, I remember like 8 years ago, Jordan Peterson spoke about him. He was lecturing like psychology stuff at Harvard, and he was thinking about this is a good content and people were engaging with it and it's interesting discussions, but why does it have to be confined to this room, these 50 people? And he started to think about, okay, let me record my lectures and put them online and see what happens. And he basically exploded because even the regular people are hungry for this kind of information. So it's the same, I think, for the rise of these scientific podcasts like Andrew Huberman and the others. How do you think they help with bringing science to the regular people and getting them interested in it?
Everything. And like I think that like I want to see more of those. Like that story you told about like Jordan Peterson especially, like we know that name today because he just started like putting a camera in his lectures. You know, like
Yep.
like if you go back before all of the stuff and like look at just like, early videos, they're just like this crappy video of like a class lecture or something.
Yeah.
Like that's all it took. And I think like as you said, like there's so much hunger for these different kinds of knowledge. And if we just had more just recordings of it, like it doesn't even have to be in a classroom. It can be like the conference talk that you put a little time preparing. And so I really want to see conferences sort of re- record and publish by default, and then we'll get more of those figures popping out. Hopefully not in the same way, but like, like in lots of, different areas and things like that. But yeah, I think even like with Jordan Peterson, like his lectures on personality, like back before all the other stuff, like because real personality science that he's talking about,
Yeah.
that you're getting like straight from the journal, basically a summary of it, versus somebody talking about astrological signs or something, so there's, yeah, I want to see that. I just record by default, even if it starts with like 5 views on a classroom video or on a conference talk, like that's still better than 0 people seeing that. And I hope that we see a lot of these like star scientists rise up from that.
Yeah, it means that someone at least clicked it. Like 5 people. It's 5 people. It's
I don't know. Like, I've totally enjoyed videos that I'm like the seventh viewer on. Like, oh, this is actually really helpful. Like, I'm glad this is here.
yeah.
Especially in science where there's these niches.
For me, in high school, I was studying. I was preparing to go into med school. So I was in a biology and chemistry track, and like pretty much 90% of my classmates went on to become surgeons and dentists, and I was on that path as well. But eventually, went to study computer science. But this interest that I had in high school still remained, and for quite a long time, I was maybe looking like a short produced YouTube video from, I don't know, some magazine, or they're communicating some new research, and I was like, that's cool. But I didn't know how interested I would be until someone like Huberman came in and gave like 2 3 hour 4 hour podcasts about a topic, and I got to watching them and I was like, okay, this is what I was missing for, let's say, 10 years. I was didn't even know that I had this interest in, I mean, I knew I was interested in biology, but I didn't know that I could be engaged and this science from universities could come to me and I could understand it.
Do you think that was like the sort of, you had this assumption of science is something that other people do off in the ivory tower. It's not for me. I can't understand it. And then when you
Yeah.
had that moment where it just sort of flipped, you're like, wait a minute, I get this or whatever. And then it's like, well, all of it's knowable if I can understand this bit, like what else you got? Um, I think that's the best we can hope for. I had that moment, like, I think in the middle of undergrad, I think I was in a relationship science class and like I didn't know that there was research on romantic relationships, right? I had no idea there was science on that. And somebody like I think the professor went over like the science of feeling clingy or something. And I was like, they study this, like and I was like, well, if this has research, everything has research, right? And it was just like, and then I just started going to science first. I think getting to that moment where you can grasp one bit of it is so important. Yeah. I think what Andrew Huberman does is amazing. And he'll give you like the full summary too. So lots
Yeah.
more of those. But they're experts in like every area. Like that's what science is, right? It's like you build expertise in this very specific area. So like getting all of those people some exposure, I really want to see.
Yeah. He sort of spearheaded this, and now there are a lot of smaller scientific podcasts coming up, like people about nutrition or sleep science, and people respond quite well. They are getting very popular because people want to know. They want to know how to live better lives, how to optimize their health, how to have better relationships, like you just said.
Yeah, exactly. And science has those tools, as Andrew Huberman says, right? Like, for anything you could possibly wonder or any problem you could have in life, there's probably some scientist who obsesses on that their entire career. And if you find that person, you're going to get a level of help and insight that you've never encountered before. Just an unbelievable level of knowledge in that person. So yeah, it's about like to a certain extent, it's about finding that person who studies the problem you have. Like that could be a really narrow problem, like in a really narrow context.
Yeah. Do you think that scientists notice that there is a divide between what the people understand and how their work is communicated? Do you think they know or are trying to fix it themselves? Like, okay, this is not working. I'm pouring my life into one PDF file that pretty much only other scientists will look into. Do you think they feel that?
Yeah, I think that there's like I think shout out to the founder of BioRender, who's this company that makes these wonderful scientific illustrations. He told me once that um like he was trying to create sort of like a hieroglyph, like a visual language of science. And it was actually sorry, it wasn't him. It was one of his designers told me. She said that they had worked with scientists to show them a sense of impact, right? To show them like, okay, your poster got a view or something. And I don't remember the exact finding, but it was something like showing scientists that they got one view on like their poster or whatever. Was like really amazing to them. They're like somebody looked at it, or whatever, and like yeah, showing scientists like the small amount of impact is so powerful. It's almost like somebody who's like been in an abusive relationship and they get like one bit of positivity, right? They're like, well, if somebody cares, or like, like, oh, I may impacted somebody. Like their whole life is just like rejection and like, like not feeling smart enough. And so getting them some sense of like like how amazing what they're doing is and how much it can impact people, I think is so important. We're getting more of it too, right? Like you get, like if you reward a scientist for translating their work and you show them that impact, they're going to get hooked on it. Yeah. So I think there's a huge demand for it. It's just like they're strangled by this shitty system right now. And it's like you have the saints, right? You have these scientists who are going to take the extra time that they don't have to write these articles or do these translations, right? And that's who you have doing science translation right now is the people who are willing to sacrifice actually their career a little bit to do it in some cases, because they don't get the career points for it as much. But we need a world where that happens by default, where that science is really getting out there by default. Scientists can kind of by default create something that's a bit more accessible. And the system helps them right now. The publishing system actively sort of fights distribution. It like locks down all the files. It closes access on everything. It makes them invisible to search engines, right? So if we had a system that actually helps scientists get the impact and mediums to let them be more creative, you won't have this split between like needing to do translation as a separate activity or not. You'll have like it just sort of happening by default. That's the world I want to see anyway. And that's the world me and you are building a little bit.
Why do you think that publishers are gatekeeping the papers and the research?
I think it's the incentive. So I'm a work psychologist by training. That's what my degrees are in. And so I tend to have like a lot of empathy even for villains, which can annoy people. But I think in the case of publishers, like there was this article written about Elsevier, who they had like contracted the same PR firm as Enron or something, and everybody was like, oh, Elsevier's so evil, publisher's so evil. But there was a quote from the CEO or somebody in the leadership there that just said, "We're just trying to survive. We have people that depend on us. We have these employees we're trying to keep employed. Like these are organizations made of people who are trying to just figure out a way forward. And right now, the only way they know is through these giant licensing subscriptions. That's the only business model they know. And that depends on being able to control that access. And so if they lose control, they lose their business model. And I just think they haven't found an alternative. And I think that's really hard when you have, 100 years of inertia to suddenly completely change your business model. But I don't think that's for like, I think the people that work there probably would like to find a way, or either they'd like to find a way or they probably rationalize that like what they're doing is fine. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think recently there's this movement to open access journals, and do you think that could help?
I mean, that was my first entry to publishing, was like being an open access fanboy. And so yeah, it's like, I mean, there's definitely a war. I think at least my understanding of what's happened so far is that whenever the open access movement has had a win, the publishers usually find a way to dial it back a little bit. So like we've got publishers having this route to open access, right? And now they start sort of jacking up all of the article processing fees, where you have to pay, $13,000 to publish an article in Nature or something. And so there is like this sort of arms race to where the publisher tries to keep their profits, understandably, I think, to survive. Um, they have to survive. And then everybody else pushes for more access. Honestly, man, I think it really relies, to me, it comes down to that hiring decision in the faculty, right? Like if you can be in the room with the other professors and you're reviewing resumes of a potential new faculty member, and they have all these publications, and you say these publications have to be in these traditional closed access journals, right? Or these like price gougy journals. There's no movement in that system because all the incentives are controlled. But the second we can find a way for these hiring committees to like accept other forms, other outlets of publication, like maybe it's some, huge tech industry person who creates this new publishing platform. Maybe it's our platform, your platform, the second we can get those publications part of the hiring decision, then the old journals lose all of their authority, right? Like they're old technology. So like the only reason to publish in them is because it's rewarded to publish in them, and you have this prestige. That's the hold. It's like it's a complete psychological hold they have over scientists. That scientists could break themselves, but it'd be hard to do.
Yeah, I'm thinking there is this, I don't know, balance or counterpoints between, like you said, creating new and better tools for publishing, where it has better incentives, or maybe restructure the current publishing industry so that they do not have to charge like this high of a price in order to just survive as a company or as an
I don't
institution.
I don't know what that looks like. Like I'm terrible at business and like money and things, so I'm the worst person to ask that. Like but it does take that, right? Like and I wonder what happens, right? Like me and you both are building these new publishing platforms, right? And I think there's probably, what I've seen at least, I don't know if you've seen this with what you're building too, but like if you can create something that the scientist is very proud of, if you can show them like, hey, you can create a publication that you're just like, wow, that looks amazing. Like I want to show this to people, right? Like, and it actually looks, I feel better almost about this one than I do my journal pub version or whatever. So where you're starting to compete a little bit with that pride, like the journal version has the name of the journal and this terrible design, right? And then these versions we're building have these beautiful designs, but no journal prestige, right? So I think there's a point where you can start to have it compete. And there's going to be a point where maybe just on pure usability and pure, like, just like pride of authorship and creativity, maybe they start sending around those new versions. And then it gets interesting. And then you have other points where maybe funders stop rewarding the old versions and start, looking at those. It's like the Gates
Yeah,
Foundations of the world.
you have to sell it to these publishers that they need to use these new platforms. And then again, it comes back to the educating them on UX, how a better tool is better for the public, better for the scientists, better for the peer review process. So I guess it comes back down to education.
I'd love to see that. Like I've been trying that for years. Like I've talked to publishers and like, look, let's find you a way, a redemption path here or whatever, right? Like let's get you these new technologies. And we've had some large publishers that have like started to do that and work with us on bringing these new technologies into their publication flow, their traditional publication flow, which is a fantastic step. And I think that's a way out. I don't know how the pricing works though. Like they make so much money. Like it's like millions of dollars for subscriptions to these journals, and that money feeds down into the conferences. So like the scientific conferences you go to sometimes are partially funded by journal subscriptions. So even the societies themselves have they need this to survive. Like if you want a cool conference to go to with cool events, part of
Hmm.
that is coming from this like blood money of science, or whatever. Like the conferences you enjoy is coming from the system you hate or whatever. And like it's a business thing. Yeah, I'm a designer, man. Like I can solve it design wise and maybe psychologically, but like business wise, I love to get some MBAs in here and just like try to find like here's how you could make obscene amounts of money, but like keeping science open. Because if it's not open, that's the other part of your question is like the traditional journals can't do the one thing that actually increases accessibility the most, and that's make everything open default for cheap, right? Like it doesn't
Yeah.
matter how many interactive graphs they have if the paper's paywalled.
Yeah, the cost has to be absorbed somewhere, whether it's like pay to publish then or the end user has to pay some type of access to access the paper. I remember trying to like one of my rabbit holes I encountered a research paper and I was like, okay, it's like behind the paywall, let me see how much is it. And it was like $50 for a paper and I was like,
Yeah.
I'm interested, but I'm not that interested.
That moment's so scary to me, right? Like, how many times does that happen? Like, a scientist is like, I have this idea to cure cancer or whatever. Oh, here's a paper that totally, like, kind of speaks to it. Paywall, never mind. Like that happens, I'm
Yeah.
sure. It's really scary.
Yeah, and like we spoke about building these new tools and I guess for me, uh, as a web developer and you as well, it's probably like a sin that we're not utilizing the web technologies to make everything more interactive and more fun. For me, it feels like the physical journals dictate also the digital version because you have to print it as well. And you cannot print like an interactive chart or some fancy animation. What do you think about how web technologies could influence the papers online?
You're totally right. It's that print first thinking, right? And that's also why we didn't get color in scientific articles for a while, right? Because it costs more to print. And then I've
Yeah.
found articles in like 2010 that like are black and white still. That one we had. But I I don't know. I mean, isn't it? Maybe I'm oversimplifying this, but you just have a print style sheet, right? Like if we were did web first, you have a print style sheet that just degrades the interactive graphs well. I mean, I think Rowan, the CEO of CurveNote, like he's thought through article design much further than I have, and he's said about this that like you want an elegant degrading where those like interactive graphs and stuff sort of have a fallback in static. So when you do print them or years from now, when like the compute technology is weird or whatever, like they can have a fallback. So I don't know if to me it's just a print style sheet with these fallbacks. I don't know if it's more complicated than that. Um, there is one other consideration that I know that some like lower income labs across the world will rely on these print publications. So sometimes people donate the print version to like lower income labs and things like that, and they use that as their knowledge. I don't know if that's still true, but for a while, that was one of, to me, like the best reasons to keep the print edition going is that like if you have these people who, well, first problem, can't afford access to the journal, which is fine. But at least if you're getting them the science through the print editions. But now I don't know why, like, I don't know if that's still true. I think the second that stops becoming true, I think the last reason to keep that alive kind of dies to me.
Yeah, how what else can web technologies help with? How can they make them more interactive? It's not just colorful charts. What else can be done?
Color was a huge, color was great.
Um,
No, I'm curious to hear your answer to this question too. Like, what have you seen? Like, I've seen the interactive charts, multimedia, like in psychology, like, generally the more processing channels, like you have eyes, you have ears, you have emotions, the more of those channels that you can communicate on, the more effective the learning experience. And so those web technologies really enable scientists to give a more emotional, more audio-visual kind of learning experience that will help with understanding. And progressive disclosure, just being able to be like, I don't want to see this yet. I don't know. What have you seen? The
I don't know.
frontier.
I'm still well in terms of web technologies. What I'm thinking about could be when you have a research. If it's like maybe computer science one or code is involved, maybe you could upload the data set or instruct the user, hey, if you want to reproduce this code, you can download this data set, you can play with the parameters, you see how we got to this, and give, because when there's a peer review process happening, people, one of the things that they look into is, can this be reproduced? How can it be reproduced? But if you give the end user the way to reproduce it themselves, because in in the peer review process, it's like they skim through it and they say, yeah, this seems reproducible. No one goes in and reproduces it actually. So if we give them this ability to actually play with it and see, okay, I see this parameter is affecting this, or this is the formula that's maybe new type of, I don't know, UV sunglasses or whatever. They could see an interactive way to, if the sun is stronger, maybe the glasses also block more light and they can see and interact with it. And even this process of interaction for me could be more interesting and help understand.
100%. Like it's both the learning and then the extending, right? Like science is standing on the shoulders of somebody of giants, right? And it's like, how fast can you climb those shoulders? If you have the code and you make it really reproducible, that means you're shortening that time a lot from one scientist understanding another scientist's work and being able to iterate it. And I think that that's crucially important because I mean, that's, you're talking about just what you said about having the code available and being able to reproduce that easily is saving months of work, like for the second scientist who wants to go further. So
Yeah,
100%.
even when I download it and run it, I can see, okay, this is a very cool research, but what if they did it in some other area or on another subject? Maybe they're analyzing some economical paper about how the, I don't know, inflation affects home prices in whatever place. Maybe they can see, okay, can this be applied to rental places in to Airbnb? So I don't know. They could see this and get inspired and like sort of fork it. And like you said, this will accelerate the time to their research being published because they can quickly access something to build on top of.
Exactly. And that's kind of the game, right? Is like that. If you picture the user story, the entire workflow of science from like learning a new fact to understanding what's missing and reproducing it, doing new studies and releasing even newer knowledge, right? A new discovery. Every step in that chain can be shorter. And like that code reproduction stage is a huge one. But it's the game of figuring out all of those workflow steps and figuring out how to help them be extremely fast and easy for the scientist.
Yeah, it's again, it's back to business, I guess, that it's like a supply chain. And when you have multiple steps
Yeah,
like producer and the delivery logistics, then the person selling this, all of these steps can be optimized and shortened and made better so that the end product is cheaper and gets to the user faster, to the end user.
it's exactly the same problem. Yeah, I mean, I've found supply chain literature really helpful, like for that reason. It's exactly the same. I wish there was the incentives, like in business, each of those little savings, excuse me, each of those little savings boost your profits.
Yeah.
In science, it boosts your discovery, but like might not actually hit your profits. Like that's the problem. Is that where is that profit motive, right? I guess for the scientists, they want more impact publications and things like that, which it can get out faster. Um, but I wish we had some kind of, in the same way business has that profit motive to squeeze every last penny out. I wish science had that same obsession about squeezing every efficiency out of the discovery process. Like like Silicon Valley will spend millions of dollars on a button, like just because the sign up button needs to be really enjoyable to press, really needs to be in the right place. The button after that needs to be in the same thumb location. They'll obsess on just those smallest details. And I think science needs exactly that level of obsession, right? Like I want to track the distance a scientist's mouse has to move to turn on a centrifuge, or like, like between like the start centrifuge and like stop centrifuge or whatever, like that travel of that mouse, in the lab software matters down to that level. But we're still on like, can we get the articles available to read? So we're far away from that. But
Yeah, but in business, I would say all these things are easy to measure because you have the tools in place or you know what metric you're optimizing for. But in science and research, do not know. You cannot measure. Okay, our time to publishing is this, or the time from conceptualizing an idea and receiving the grant to publishing the research is this amount of time, and gathering the tools and the resources or materials needed for this. I don't think I'm not familiar, but I don't
can
think
you
this is
though?
measured. Yeah, I don't
I
think
agree
these
it's
things
not
are measured.
measured, but is it measurable? Is the interesting question to me. So like that's what I want to spend the rest of my life working on, right? Is like, and that's what I've done with that. So we've launched the scientific journal Science UX, and part of the first goals of Science UX is figuring out how to measure these things. You know, like I think you're absolutely right, like that it's not being measured, and I think I read this. You know, my background's post. I'm most known for the poster stuff, but like in the poster literature that exists, there's the sentence about I was trying to figure out how to measure the impact of scientific posters. And I think the best poster scholar I'm aware of, Nicholas Rowe, he had a line in one of his papers. It's like, not only are we not measuring posters, we're not measuring conferences. Like there's no measurement happening of the system as much. And so, yeah, I think those things are measurable though, with the same kind of human factors methods. Like even there, I looked into measuring things like rate of discovery, which is kind of abstract, and there are ways to do it kind of, but at a low level, like when it just comes down to those usability things, how fast can you understand something? How fast can you find a figure that you're looking for? Those are very measurable, even if we're not measuring them.
There's
So
this principle in project management: what gets measured gets improved.
yeah,
So
that and what doesn't get measured just devolves into like disordered chaos or whatever, just entropy, which is what I think about every time I look at posters. Like this makes sense that we were never measuring this, and they just devolved into like just these walls of text messes and things like that.
you brought up Silicon Valley, and this is something true with all big tech companies. If people working there try to change a button, or maybe they change the algorithm how your feed is displayed, if they see, okay, this makes the user 1% less likely to leave the website, that's a huge success for them.
Yeah, it's
But they
done. Yeah,
can,
yeah, it's great. Yeah.
yeah,
Like people get promoted based on that or whatever. Yeah, yeah, I want that level of obsession, but it starts with what you're saying. It starts, we have to figure out how to measure those things first, which is really hard. And like I think you and I will be able to start looking at this before others, maybe, because if we're building these publishing systems, we'll have that data, right? We'll be able to look at these micro level like measurements between peer review steps or between publishing steps. Look, even just being able to get viewership stats, like a heat map on what people read in the
yeah.
article, right? Is something you can't do with a PDF. You can only really do it across the board if you have a publishing system that is web based, which we're both building. So like I think we'll start to get these stats.
Yeah, I think it can be done where you have both the PDF version and the web version. And like you said, there is this, I don't know how you put it, but reducing it when you're trying to print it, but you still have the
Yeah.
rich web version where you can interact with it. You can use all of the web tools available to us to improve that. And also, if you're using a web platform, you can measure everything. So just putting it there, it's game changing.
It's already, I would love to see if like Elsevier and them have stats on that. Although I wonder like one thing that might screw us up is that scientists trust the PDF more, right? And like a lot of times they're going to hit that web article and just immediately download the PDF. Not because it's a better reading experience necessarily, but because it's reliable. Like there's that, and that's going to fight us a lot on that measurement. So what I think we might see is just people read the abstract on the web version, hit the PDF download, and then go in Zotero or something and go through it.
Do you
Um,
think because they trust it more?
I haven't seen or done research on this, so I'm just guessing. But like, there's this like when you find the web version of a scientific article, you don't know if it's going to be there next year. And like next year is
Yeah.
when you're going to publish the paper that you're doing the research for. And when you're going through your citations and you have your sentence that you wrote based on that paper, and you've got to go find that paper and make sure you quoted it correctly, right? Like you have to know exactly where it came from, and you've got to be able to find that paper. And the only guaranteed way to make sure that happens is to have a local copy. And so that's something that, again, it's one of those toxic things that this traditional publishing system has done to us, is that like, even if we had this new better reading experience online, people are still afraid of publishers paywalling it suddenly because of
Mhm.
the past, that they'll still keep going back to the old PDF. And so it I think that's going to take some change too. I don't know totally how to solve that. I think that there this volcanologist once told me that like, when she publishes a paper, part of the reason for publishing in the traditional system is that scientific publishing kind of makes a promise to the scientist that your work's now a permanent part of the record and it'll still be here. I think some of these web-based platforms lack that feel. So things we can do to make it feel more permanent, but that's going to fight us on the measurement at first.
Okay, hear me out.
Go
Now,
for no, go please. Yeah,
when I was preparing for this podcast and like watching some of your talks and what's the state of the industry, I got to thinking about blockchain. That if we could put scientific research on the blockchain, first it will exist forever. Also, it's easier to track what's happening with it. You can also reference it, and you can see which research references which paper, and also it can be monetized, right? So let's say I'm a scientist, I publish a new paper, and I can publish it for free, and I can say it's also free to access. But every time you reference it via the blockchain, you have to like pay some small amount of money, so that if 100 scientists publish it, reference it, you're making money, because this also incentivizes people to write papers which other scientists want to refer to, which is the whole base of science, right? Like building on top
right.
of one another. And when you have this incentive, this will shift the monetary perspective towards how usable this paper is.
It needs to be, you want that impact. Like, you're going to do your best to get the impact of that paper up, right? And like make sure people
Yes.
understand it's, and like get it, make sure people are aware of it, make sure people know its quality, and like make it as good as possible. No, I think that like there's something there, especially the blockchain has the permanent storage problem solved, right? Like that's the
Yeah.
ultimate solution to that. I've seen people build things like that. But as with everything in scientific publishing, nothing works because the old world is so incentivized or whatever. But like, yeah, and I think there's something there, especially as far as storage. And the other thing the blockchain solves is uh, versioning. So like, if let's say they post something that has an error in it, and then someone points that out in peer review, and they correct that error, right? You have this perfect chain of all the versions that
Yeah.
really fights doctoring of things and stuff. So there's a lot of good it could do for us. I'd like to see more of it.
Yeah. Also, it's like you said something like you've also spoken about like modularity of research. Like for
Yeah,
example, you can take only maybe a graph or the research data or some other type of finding, and you don't have to reference the whole paper. You can take this small block and use it somewhere. This can also be done on the blockchain, where you can just publish your research. Okay, I use this research or this like population research that I did, and I publish it, and I use this for my paper, but it is open for you. For example, for $10, you can reference it in your paper, right? So
I would think
that can be done as well, I think.
no the chain of authorship gets even more important when you start moving to help thinking of a figure as a publication,
Yes.
right? And so because you really science is that mashing together of a bunch of pieces from other people's work, right? And so when we make it literally that, which is not very far off, um, you need to preserve that authorship chain on each of those single pieces. And that's something, yeah, again, the blockchain could really help with. I'd like to see it done. I think we need some kind of mass permanent storage system like that. And like, I would think it'd be cool for people like who are running the blockchain locally to like like you're hosting science. It's kind of like the SETI at home experiment, right? It's like your PC is not mining Bitcoin. You're actually helping to host science, and you're participating in science in that small
Yep.
way of donating your computational resources. There's a lot there. I think I don't understand it well enough to know exactly how to do it or what's next, but I've seen projects looking at that. There's one in particular that I'll find for you and send you after the call that I think is trying to do exactly that.
Yeah, that would be very cool. Thank you.
And sure.
And this also, like you say, the chain of updating work, let's say for a paper, there is this author, Bawaji. He's writing about startups and internet culture. He is publishing his book, but like he has a web version. So that once you purchase the book, he periodically makes updates, adds chapters, edits data when there's new finding, and you still have the newest version because you already purchased it. It's like
Cool.
he said that I'm thinking of the book like a code repository in GitHub, for example, that when you publish the new changes, you can get the new code exactly. So I'm making changes to my book where people get always the newest version and they have this book for life.
That's the feel you want for a scientific study, right? It's sort of
Yeah.
like, it's just always current. That's great. I think GitHub has really got a lot of the patterns we probably need.
Yeah. What do you think about AI being used to generate research content and also the rise of the need for research integrity tools?
This is relevant to both of our jobs, right? Like we're
Yeah.
both working on these research integrity checks. I think it's funny to see this arms race, right? Like people doing fake science, then people building detectors for fake science, and then the fake gets better, detector gets better. Part of me like chaotically loves it. Like this is messed up, but like all of that, all of the writing in science was already subjective, right? Like it was already like kind of ethereal, and like I hope that it forces us to really build much like both much better filters and objective scientific publications, right? Um, so I think we might end up solving a lot of science's longstanding problems in fighting these AI fakes. We might actually also fight just like the bad science and the irreproducible stuff and the data faking and stuff like that that was human done. And so like that's going to be good for it. Um, and there was already more science than everybody could read, right? Like there was 2 million publications a year. I can't even keep up like in my own area. And like I think to the extent that this AI is going to create so many new papers, if it just contributes to that overwhelm problem, it's going to encourage more solutions again. And so like I really want to see a world where you kind of have these two kinds of, this is just my own kind of scientific publishing thing, but I want to see two types of scientific publications. I want to see one that is so objective that you literally just feed a data set into an AI, and then you tell it what the variables are. Like this is this measurement, this measurement, this measurement, and how I collected it. And then everything else off of that can be sort of interpreted because that's the most objective part. And at the other side, I want to see these really engaging learning experiences that are human created. Like I was the at JupyterCon in Paris last year, and they showed off these like Jupyter Notebook based scientific publications, which is something we're working with, where you read them and it's like this incredible learning tool. Like what you were saying about like the UV light and the sunglasses. Like you're scrolling through this paper where you can change the amount of UV light and see it bounce off the sunglasses in different ways. And just like as a student or as somebody reading it, like it's incredible. And some of these scientists I've seen create these like really engaging papers with interactive figures. They become just next level learning tools for science and resources for other scientists. Um, they use more like half like tools, half like textbooks, or whatever. So like that kind of divergence between like hard, objective, unfakeable stuff and like really human personality laden interactive stuff. I think I want to see both those sides come out of this AI stuff. I'm hoping it forces us to that. But maybe it'll explode the world. Who knows? I'm
It's
genetically
either.
optimistic. So
Yeah, I'm optimistic as well. Well, there is this concept in online content creation. It's that now everybody is using AI to write their articles, write their tweets, whatever. But this will cause the novel ideas to actually rise to the top because when you use AI, it doesn't get above a certain threshold of ideas. It only introduces like basic concepts. At this moment, it's not capable of introducing something novel. So the whole market or the whole online space, you get flooded with the basic ideas, which nobody cares about. But this will force the novel ideas, which are actually taught by humans, to raise to the top and actually make the impact.
That's super cool. I hope that happens. And like it's interesting, especially in science, right? Where like science is all about that new information. And so a
Yes.
tool that has like the existing information, it's interesting that like it can only take you up to a certain level. I wonder if it'll get better, but I hope that that's the future is that like AI just handles all the stuff that is, and we can focus on the new stuff. That'd be a great world.
On the flip side, there's these tools like Elicit, which allow you to
Yeah.
search all the research papers. For example, I'm looking for, let's say, the impact of fruits on gut health. And if I type this query, it's like a chat GPT interface in a way, and it gives you all the relevant papers and also shows you a summary or relevant like abstract summary. Okay, this paper researched this fruit and found this thing. And this is like the good way that science can be impacted, because also helps me as a regular user. I'm not a professional scientist, that I can have access to the science papers and I can refer to them and see what's the newest research. And also it's cheaper. I'm not paying for each article. I'm paying maybe a subscription or some amount of tokens, and I can use however much I want.
That's a great It's wonderful. And they've been innovating and iterating that for years. And like, yeah, I think that's that view you get from Elicit to me is the future, right? I get the question for you is can you imagine getting the information, getting yourself to an understanding of a question faster than Elicit?
Yeah, but
What would it look like?
it's, well, one of the things is that we'll have this large amount of data, and this is something that you're trying to push, like machine readable science, which is because you cannot just feed a PDF. I mean, you can, but it's hard to process.
Yeah.
But if we get to this point and we have this huge amount of scientific papers, figures, research, and if we can feed it to one AI, can we have like the chief scientist?
Yeah. That's I kind of love that. I know that's heresy or whatever, but like just the oh, if it's because it fixes that overload. That's all you want when you're trying to understand something. It's just like a really clear explanation that consolidates everything on all the recent stuff and is accurate, which is the hard part. Um, and so like yeah, I think probably I wonder if like some unique visuals and things like that. So like the summary paragraph is all of the right words, and then you want I think the missing piece of that to me is like the how would the best science educator explain that same question to you, right? They would
Yeah,
use visuals and interactive graphs and probably have some analogies and jokes in there, right? In addition to that summary. And like that's the missing thing to me is like the fastest way to learn something is something called the zone of proximal development. So
yeah,
I have to know, you've heard of this, where like I know
yes.
what you know, and then just extend it a little bit. I just go like right outside your current knowledge and then make it very, very rich in the learning experience, right? And then multiple times. And so AI is missing you. It doesn't know what you know. So it doesn't know how to just extend your knowledge. And it's missing all that multimedia, but if you exclude that, to me, Elicit is the best we have as far as it's the closest to that experience for science. And I love seeing all of their updates.
Have you seen ChatGPT tease this voice mode a couple of months ago? It's still not out yet.
Okay.
We're still waiting for it. But they gave this example that a child is like, let's say, using their tablet and they're working on a math problem, and they share their screen to ChatGPT and say, okay, work me through this problem and help me learn. And you can instruct it to teach you via the best approach. Maybe you study best under pressure, or sometimes you need to get walked through a problem, and you can have that. Like,
Cool.
yeah,
Wait,
I'll send you the
it'll
video.
learn your learning style?
I mean, not yet. You can instruct it like, hey, do not give me the answer straight away. Like, walk me through it, ask me questions. You can give it this instruction. I don't think it can understand you yet, but when you combine this with, let's say, you feed it a lot of scientific knowledge, right now I can go to ChatGPT and say, can you generate a graph, maybe, or a line chart about the inflation in Bulgaria and the average salary? It can find the data and then generate me the chart. So I do not have to rely on actual science. It can, or look into scientific papers, it can do it for me. So if it has a large amount of data, it's quite easy to say, okay, can you see some correlation between these two things that are completely unrelated?
That is, to me, that's the future, right? Is like being able to have all the data accessible like that, and then just be able to ask questions of the data itself. Not like people's interpretations of the data, but the data itself. I think that's like peak science to me.
Yeah, and
And I
this is
go ahead.
again what you said about the modular data. If we have it and yeah, we can plug it into the AI, it can do that as well.
That gets
Right
better,
now,
right? The more modular
yeah.
and the more machine readable.
And I've also seen that ChatGPT has sort of these entry points that if you have an software or an web app and you have an API endpoint, you can connect it to ChatGPT to create your own bot and to say, okay, when I want to fetch this type of data, this is this endpoint. When I want to process this type of data, it uses this endpoint, and now you have a conversational chatbot where you can interface with your application. So if a user,
Wow.
let's say, I have a, I don't know, a plane ticket booking system, now I can just interface it to ChatGPT, and the user can go into my custom bot and say, "Hey, what are the flights to Vienna?" Gets a list and say, "Can you book me this?" And it knows, okay, when I need to book, I need to call this endpoint. Like it's very basic, but it's getting there.
That is, yeah, that's the future to me. It's like, I guess the other question is like, if you think about scientific data, like, so there may be, with 100 data sets on any question or a million data sets or whatever. How do you make those standardized so that it can pull from all of them? How do you make a combined data set? Because if you could have that, if you could have a combined data set, like of all the, I mean, that's what we try to do in a meta analysis, right? Is like combine the data on one research question. If you could have a combined data set on all the data sets that have ever been measured and standardize it somehow, you'd have to also know how it's collected. Is the other problem. There's a lot of problems in there, but that experience though of just having data on reality and being able to ask it questions is probably like peak science, I would think.
Yeah, because data is objective; it doesn't have any bias.
Exactly. Yeah.
How you
That's the dream,
interpret,
right?
yeah,
And then you can write up the questions that you asked or whatever, and you can form that understanding and write your subjective piece. But like that's I mean, to me that's where it goes. Like when I think of like the user experience of the system that like the aliens or whatever probably have. It's probably like a lot of data and you know an AI tool to draw from it.
yeah. Now that
Um,
we're speaking, it actually got my head spinning a bit when you think about where can we get and what tools are starting to emerge to help us get there. But also, it has like a ton of problems that we're trying to solve. You with your
yeah, yeah.
work, interfacing with data, etc. It's like a lot of variables.
There's a ton of those though, but there's this the problems in it. But like there's this word. Did you ever see the movie Annihilation?
No.
Are you there? Oh, so the book series on based on that has this. They have this word called terroir, and it's for like winemaking, which is like when you drink a wine, you can taste the where the grape came from. Like, oh, I taste a little bit of Australia's dirt in this wine or whatever, right? So it's like that sense you get of the source of the wine, right? But the way the word was used in these book series is that you can get the terroir of a person's background. Um, if you've ever met a person who's like, like maybe they're like really, they're like covered in like different like colors and like flares and scarves and things. And you're getting a little sense of their inner world. And then you go into their place and there's like, like art all over the walls. And there's, like, it's like they're a very like just artistic person. And you're getting that sense of their broader world. And like, from that first kind of impression, you can do that with the future too, I think. So in the same way that you see a car drive by from the 1950s and you get like a little feel of what it was like when every car looked like that and everything
Yeah.
had that design language, right? You can get that for the future too, I think. I think that you can have these experiences where you just get a little feel of what 50 years is going to feel from now is going to feel like, right? And I think that the experience you had there, I don't know what those are that you've encountered, but for me, like typing in elicit and getting that summary is a little bit of that feel. Being able to go through these scientific articles we're seeing with the interactive figures that are like really engaging is a little bit of that like whiff of the future, where it's all going to be this. And the data thing you're talking about to me is that it gives me that feeling of like in 100 years, that might just be the norm, and like we're just getting a sense of it.
Yeah, this is something like if you watch a TV series that is set in a certain period, for example, when you watch Mad Men, yeah, you watch it for the plot, you watch it for the characters, but you also watch it for
The
the
feel of the
60s, right?
setting. Yeah,
So,
exactly. And you can do
it,
that with the future, I think. It's that old quote, right? The future is already here. It's just not widely distributed yet. And like
yeah,
like, we're all using things right now that are version ones of something that will completely dominate our future that we don't realize yet, right? I mean, like you imagine going back to the 90s or the early 2000s and using a Palm Pilot, right? It's like this feels there's something here, and like that was the little first iteration or whatever of what would become smartphones and things like that. We're probably surrounded by stuff like that, and I hope in science I could be wrong. It could be like 100 years from now, we're still downloading PDF files from paywalls or whatever. But
no, I don't think so. I mean, I'm optimistic that we won't get to there.
like before science, I'd be like, nah. And now I'm like, maybe.
Yeah.
Who knows? I'm pretty stubborn.
Also, I got to thinking another problem that right now a lot of doctors, like general practitioners, they do not often reference the newest research. They don't, once they graduate, they don't keep up to date. And I guess
Oh,
if we can make that more accessible, there are right now tools which are something like Glass AI, where you go in and you enter the patient's data and what kind of symptoms and complaints they have, and they give you an amazing breakdown of, okay, first check this, check this, check this. The patient has potentially this disease or maybe this issue. Ask him these follow-up questions. Send him for this type of blood work, and like it gives you the whole step-by-step process, like the thing that you go to your doctor for. And I have checked with my surgeon and doctor friends, like, okay, let's say give me some patient data, like some patient comes into your office and he dictates, I type it to the AI and show him, okay, this is the solution, and he says, yeah, this is pretty much what we do, and this is the same thing that
whoa,
I would have done.
that's great.
So this will sort of help, like you go into the doctor's office and you enter it to your AI, and the doctor sort of oversees the AI, and the
Yeah.
AI already has the newest research, right? The doctor doesn't have to think about, okay, what does this new drug impact with a patient with this type of disease? The AI will sort of lay out everything, and the doctor will just have to oversee and say, okay, this makes sense, etc., etc., and this will, I guess, accelerate public health.
And I mean, there are three things there. One is like, of course, it helps the patients make sure that they get the best possible diagnosis, right? Like they're not going,
Yes.
like the idea that there's a crappy doctor that you could walk into, is really terrifying to me that there's variance in ability of healthcare professionals or whatever. Um, but also like for the doctor, they get the update on the new stuff, right? And really in general, like that experience of what you said in the beginning of like keeping up with your own area after you graduate, right? Like that's something that I struggle with. It's like I still care about what's happening with my dissertation topic that is completely unrelated to my current work. But like the best way to do that right now is like find a good updated literature review, but like those are only published every few years, right? And so having something that just sort of knows where you're at and then like extends you is like I think that whole like catch up experience in learning science for the scientist, like catch me up on this or whatever, based acknowledging that I already have this insane amount of background knowledge, catch me up is like that user task is something that I think hasn't been addressed well enough yet. But it goes
I
back to
mean,
that zone of proximal development thing.
yeah, at some point you have to upload what you know so that the AI or whatever
Yeah,
knows where your knowledge. So maybe when eventually all of us have a chip in our brains, then we can offload this.
at 100%. Yeah, that'd be the best version, right? Where if it really can scan your brain and like here are the connections you're missing, let's make them for you or whatever. I feel like that applies. I don't know. That could go really wonderfully with like everything beyond scientific knowledge. Like this is probably way off topic, but um, I took a cultural psychology class one time, and the if you heard the analogy of the blind man and the elephant, where
No.
are there are three blind men crawling all over an elephant. One of them grabs its trunk and he says it's a branch, and another one grabs its like ear and says no, it's a leaf or whatever, and another one grabs its tail and says no, it's a snake or whatever. And they each, like, from their own perspective, that's how the brain works, is we have a little bit of limited data and then we draw this extrapolated conclusion, right? That's how most people see that's how all of us see the world. We take the limited data we have and we draw conclusions on it, right? But if your goal is actually to see the world accurately, you need other people's perspectives, right? You need to combine them if you want to see the elephant or whatever, right? And that means like people you hate, people you disagree with, that still are seeing, they're probably almost certainly seeing data points you're not seeing, right? Because because they've drawn conclusions that are way off yours or whatever, right? And so like if you had that device you were talking about, the chip in your brain, like you could use it for perspective learning too. I don't know. That would solve a lot. But then you're just, at this point, we're just a collective consciousness or whatever. We're just the board if you have
Yeah.
everybody's knowledge in your brain.
Also, I think that if you have this perspective of what the other person is thinking, you probably won't be hating him as much.
I think that's
And
very true.
also about what right now the Tesla cars are currently doing, they have this like very mature AI in them, and they have all these sensors. But the car is not in isolation. You do not just drive your car. All of the Teslas, they combine, they are like a hive, like a swarm,
Yeah.
and all of them are communicating with each other. So I know that at the next intersection there is something happening. I will slow down, or I will take an alternative route. So this collective consciousness, but right now it's in cars.
So we're just going to end up as a hive mind, is what I'm getting out of this. It's the only destination or whatever.
Yeah,
If we can handle
sounds
that much data in our brains. I don't know
like
this.
a
Yeah.
boring dystopia.
Yeah, I get the idea is definitely not appealing to me, but it's the logical conclusion is if you really wanted to understand something, I guess. But we could start with just the scientific knowledge. Maybe we do go that way. Who knows? I don't know. I probably won't be. We won't be around for that stage. But
Yeah, I guess this is the longevity science right now. It's very like picking up. So my goal and some of my friends that I'm talking about is try not to die for 50 years or something like that.
then you
And
can get the escape velocity and live to 100 and live to
yeah,
yeah, like yeah.
so that's what
That's
we're hoping.
same. Like you just gotta live long. And yeah. Oh no, same. I'm all for it. I want to like die on Mars in a comfortable place. Like
Really?
that's my goal. I think so. I mean, like I would totally move to Mars as soon as I can like shower every day or something. Maybe not as much now because I've got a daughter and things like that. But like I had a pretty big lust for adventure, so I need
You
not
can
like novelty calms me down. So something like that.
you can
Like
go to Mars together, I guess.
that's right. We just gotta survive 50 years, and I'll see you there. We'll do a follow up.
Yeah, I remember my one of my first sci-fi books that I read was like called Mars Plus, I guess. It's not like nothing
What is it called?
spectacular. Mars Plus.
I read like the
It
whole uh, John Carter series. But that's the only Martian stuff I've done.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
it's
Tell me
like
about the book
nothing
though.
special, but it got me thinking about, okay, how does Mars look like? How are we going to live there? And it was like quite interesting.
I I'm really curious to see what society emerges like with no like how do we could redo social rules. They'll have different social norms like in the Expanse series or whatever.
Yeah, I
But
guess this is the thing I'm most interested in, about how are we going to start society from scratch, like new democracy, new form of government,
yeah,
and
new constitution. Like
I don't
we
know,
could.
whoever
We
are
really could.
are we going to fight for Mars like people did for when they discovered the Americas for like land and territories?
That seems like I don't know. Like I think getting a bunch of education in psychology has given me more and less faith in people. So it's like, yeah, I'm really pretty tolerant these days, and I love people for all their traits or whatever, even if some of them are bad or maladaptive. But at the same time, I acknowledge that we are still monkeys, and so like we're like monkeys plus. And so you could tell me both ways that we're going to build this utopia with, and I'd be like, cool, I could see that happening. You can tell me we're just going to devolve into violence and war. I'd be like, yeah, sure, that makes sense too, or whatever. Like, I don't know, but I hope that I'm sure some good will come of it.
Yeah, this is the same principle with like try not to die for now to reach the escape velocity, and it's the same with humanity. Try not to destroy ourselves a bit.
Hey, I think that's another good way. Yeah, exactly. Abstractly, we should all just try to die for 50 years or
Yeah,
whatever.
can
And
we
then, I
chew for
mean,
like 50 years and
sort of last. And then if we can work, I mean, psychologically, I guess if we can work on scarcity, this is way off topic, but like if I were to pick one variable, if we could just reduce, that resource scarcity and give everybody access to more like a better life or whatever, and then a lot of psychology takes care of itself. There's like a theory called the scarcity value theorem, where generations that are born into less scarcity, like more resources and more sense of safety, you're like more creative and like more like tolerant of people.
yeah.
And then the generations that are born into like a war zone, right, are like super survivalistic. They have really like traditional, like judgy values. They're very intolerant, right? Because those are adaptive for survival. Um, so yeah. Hopefully
This is
we'll invent 3D printed food and stuff like that.
Yeah, the thing is that the unfortunate part is that on Earth there are like enough resources for everybody, like it's just greed and distribution. And what I'm seeing right now, what you just said, is very cool about Bulgaria. We're sort of like post-communist, post-Soviet influence. Like in 1991, the one I think when we sort of the Berlin Wall fell, and we had this whole generation right now, which was the generation before mine. They were like living under communism and socialism, and everything was constricted. They didn't have much to eat. They had to have their own farms and work for their food, basically. And you can see their attitude about new things, about thinking about higher subjects. And now I can see the new generation, which is like I'm sort of on the edge, but the new generation, I can see they're like night and day. We're like different populations, even though the old generation raised the new one, but under new resources.
That's fascinating. I mean, it holds up, right? And that's supposed to
Yeah.
hold. And so, yeah, but I think that that's the solution. Maybe, I mean, we're both in technology, so it's silly to me for me to be like technology solves it or whatever. But if we can figure out how to create, like replicators or whatever that, can give people housing and food and healthcare or whatever. If we had med pods and, replicators that produce food in houses, like I think we'd get a lot better humans if there wasn't all these survival needs.
I
But
think there was like a research or some finding that the best way for people to solve climate change and the climate is to lift people out of poverty. Because
yeah,
when you're at the bottom, you don't care about anything. You're trying to feed your child, you're trying to survive for the next day. But once people like got above a certain threshold of income and they had enough resources, then they could think about okay, like being a better person, caring about the environment.
it's so human, right? Like once I've got mine, then I can think about other people, right? Once I'm
Yes.
taken care of, my family's okay, then I can start thinking altruistically about what I can, do or whatever. And like, I think there are a few studies on that one. 100%. I could totally buy that. I'm not a climate scientist, but like that makes sense to me,
I
psychologically.
want to end on one last topic, and I would
Sure.
like to speak about your master's thesis. And
Wait, you found that? Which one? Wait, what?
no, I
Go ahead.
didn't
I
find
never
it.
get to talk about psychology.
Yeah, I sort of like found it in like the resume, like developed a machine learning algorithm to analyze the language used for like people's working environment.
I've never gotten to talk about this. Yeah, it's been used by a few people now. I didn't publish it through the traditional ways because I hate publishing or whatever. Like I was like, I'm not going through the months it takes to put this in a journal or whatever, but I've gotten other people to use it. So yeah. What questions?
Yeah, so you found out that there is like a correlation between their work satisfaction and the language they use, right?
Yeah. So if you at least the data in my master's suggests that if you ask somebody what they do for a living or tell them about your job and they say something like I work at a bank or like I work as a whatever or whatever, they're putting distance between themselves and the job, right? Like currently I am working at a place that does this is like the most distant I could say that, right? Whereas the opposite is something close, like I'm a science communicator, right? Or like I am improving the UX of science, right? And those first two words, I am a or I am, right? And you're moving your work close to your identity and how you talk about it. And when you hear somebody talk about their work as kind of close to their identity, it may be a predictor that they find their work more meaningful. And if they talk about their work really distantly, like currently I work at a whatever, like then that's probably a sign that they don't find their work very meaningful. But that was really interesting. And that holds up. There's research on like how like identity and work meaningfulness are related. But that was my
This
first
is
research area, was what makes work meaningful or meaningless.
yeah, this is very cool. I read about some dating, like not research, but like the state of dating in the West. And when you go into a date and you talk about your job, the way that you describe it to your potential date is very impactful about how they perceive you. And like you said, if you try to say, I'm an investment banker, it's like cool. But if you say, I try to help like underdeveloped communities like receive investment to better improve their like neighborhoods or something like that, you're more attractive to that person. It feels like you're more connected to your job.
There's actually research on this that yeah, but that's this seems like it would hold up. And if I can give you any dating tips related to meaningful work research, it would be that meaning is contagious, right? And it does actually increase attraction like that, or at least there's been a couple of studies that have showed that, where like if you talk about something that you find very meaningful, that meaningfulness, like for lack of a better term, it gives you charisma almost, like it almost like
Yeah,
it's
passion.
attractive to other people. It's passion. You have this passion that you get genuine meaning out of, and that's attractive to people. And then I've even, we wrote a paper once on meaningfulness in teams. So that like if one person can see the work that way, genuine, not, you can't fake it, people see through that shit. But like if you genuinely see this part of your work as meaningful, your coworkers and the people that work around you will start to kind of catch that a little bit through emotional contagion. And so you can see that for good or ill in these organizations that where one person just really sees how it's meaningful and the other people that get behind it, You do that on dates anywhere.
And we go back to the part where you spoke about if you see a bit of personality in the scientific paper, then you can see the passion behind the author that he tried to communicate.
100%. Yeah, exactly. And like there are after and when you talk to scientists, they're so passionate. A lot of them. There's this is back to the meaningfulness research, but you can have different attitudes towards your job. Like some people think of their job as like just like I work, I get money, and I spend that money on the weekends, and I want to make as much money as possible, doing as little work as possible, so I can spend the most time on the weekends where I find meaning or whatever. And then there are people who are like, oh, my work is about that next level, like getting to that next promotion, that next pay level, that next level of prestige, right? So I work my ass off to get that next level, right? But then there are people who are just like really have a sense of calling in their work. And so scientists spread that gamut too. Everyone does. And so, but you do have those scientists who just like, and a lot of times it's some of the top people who are just like, they see something about that topic they're studying that just fascinates them for decades, right? And when you talk to them, they can make you passionate about it. Like I've talked to scientists and suddenly I'm passionate about like yeast or something, we're like, wow,
Yeah.
yeast is amazing. Like, oh, like, I had one researcher explain to me how yeast is the key to like long-term space travel. And by the end, I was like, yeast is the most important thing we have. He's right. I used to study
Yeah.
yeast or whatever, like it's just so infectious, yeah. And I hope that more comes out. I can't wait for more of that to come out. And that's where we're doing what we're doing, right? I guess is to give these scientists these tools to hopefully get that out.
Okay, last question. If
Sure.
you can indicate how a person feels about his job by his language, can you change your language about how you speak on a subject to change how you feel about it? What do you think?
Theoretically, yes. So one of my takeaways from 8 years in psychology was that, did you ever have one of those cars when you were little where like a toy car where you turn the steering wheel and the wheels turn?
Yes?
And you notice how you can turn the wheels and the steering wheel turns?
Yeah.
Like you can go the other way. I
Hmm.
think people work that way too. A lot of times, if you change behavior, you change cognition. Um, Talking isn't strong enough, maybe though. I think you could just like fake it till you make it. The talking about your job that way would help you see those variables. So back to the elephant and the blind man and the elephant. If you start focusing yourselves on those positive variables, then that will take over and it'll change your attitude probably. But you have to believe it. You have to really focus on those things. Like I don't like there is research on trying to fake meaning or whatever. And people see through it, it doesn't work. But yeah, I think you could. I think you could like brainwash yourself or whatever, um, in a good way, you know? And I
Yeah.
think some people are better than that than others. There's a whole literature, if anybody's really interested in this, on meaning. One of the problems I had in that exact study was that I asked people how meaningful they found their work, and everyone said a little meaningful. And which is for a scientist is terrible. I'm like, no shit. What do I, I need variance, right? I need
Yeah.
like people who hate their job, people who love their job, or whatever. And one of my advisors very smartly pointed out to me, he's like, but isn't that interesting though, Mike? Isn't it interesting that everyone said that their job was a little bit meaningful? Like we have that ability to make meaning out of anything, and some people can do that more quickly than others. So some people are very good at just finding meaning in their job, but you have to actually find it.
Yeah, I can see that. There's also like the way you speak about yourself, like, oh, I'm so stupid about this and whatever, it sort of impacts you as well.
Self-fulfilling. It's again those variables you see, right? And like another thing I thought about that too was that like I always wondered whether people who like use that as like a humbling thing or as an inflating thing, right? Like that's the other variable with I'm so stupid specifically, right? It's like you can feel that way and you have this depressive tendency. Um, but also like there's a healthier version of that where like, if you talk to really big experts and things, they have that Dunning-Kruger effect going on where
Mm-hmm.
they're just like, I don't understand this or this or this. I'm really confused about this, or whatever, and they do that to sort of like really keep themselves level. Like I still struggle with this, even though the success is like inflating around them. And then there's other people who maybe like are super arrogant, but they haven't done anything, and they're like, oh, the best, I'm or whatever, and so like there's something there too where like you don't want that like false like verification or whatever. But I don't know. Maybe the goal is like just like this is a realistic kind of strengths and weaknesses. It's kind of how we see people in organizational and work psychology. In work psychology, you see every human trait as having like a positive and a negative. Everyone. And so like even traits you think are always positive, like creativity, it's like, well, that person's probably pretty messy and unorganized, It's like they're
Mm-hmm.
always late, but they're so creative, and it's like it's the same place or whatever. Or like they always try to reinvent the wheel. It's like, yeah, that's their personality. They're creative, right? Um, and then somebody who's really good at planning or whatever, like, oh, this person's amazing. They're always on time. They're really good at planning, but they can be kind of negative. That's kind of like a
Mm-hmm.
correlated kind of personality trait, right? And so like every trait has both sides. And I think I don't know, maybe seeing yourself that way is the most accurate. Even things like psychopathy and narcissism have situations where maybe they're okay. Like if you have a surgeon that nicks your artery, do you want that surgeon to freak out and having a panic attack, or do you want them to focus, right? And
Yeah,
who can focus when they've just asked, oh, both of them murdered someone? Who can stay focused without anxiety, right? Those kind of things. Anyway,
not me.
I was way off
Okay.
topic. Me neither.
Yeah, that's a whole rabbit hole we can go into, but I guess
Yeah,
we can end at this point.
sure.
Mike, thanks so much for blessing us with your time. It was a very interesting discussion.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad we got to psychology too. It was fun. Yeah. I hope to work. I'll probably be seeing you around since we work on the same thing.
Yeah, hopefully. Where can people find you? What can keep up with your work?
Um, on the Science UX Reddit, my YouTube channel, Mike Morrison, and then now I have scienceux.org, which is my new scientific journal, just starting to post this kind of research on saving scientists clicks and helping them understand things faster, and on all
Awesome. I
social
will
medias.
put these links in the video description so that people can
Cool.
find you.
Awesome.
Okay. Thank
All
you so
right.
much.
Thank you again. See you soon. See you.